a good athlete, trying to be a good athlete translates to any sport, right? So with that said, I kind of want to go on and touch on a topic that actually you brought up. So I just thought about this at the top of my head. This wasn't even planned.
Look at you.
But
Off script, people.
let's talk about the differences in training baseball players and football players, because you just brought that up, and so we'll just kind of go off the dome. But because there are, I think, a lot of differences, but a lot of similarities too, right? It goes back to being a good athlete on a football field. If you train to be a good athlete in the football field, that's probably going to help you be a good athlete in the baseball field too, right? But there are differences, and so B, I kind of want you to kind of jump in like your main differences that you see between, and then maybe one or two like similarities, because I think there's more similarities than differences, and
Right.
like Greg said, from the outside looking in, he thought baseball was just like, kind of like soft,
Right.
play with some bands and go throw hard, right? But now, so
I was wrong. I was wrong.
he was right,
wrong.
but that's still a misconception that's
Oh, yeah.
changing because
Oh, yeah.
of like really got great people in the strength field, but there's still differences and still similarities in training those guys. So someone who's trained multiple NFL and MLB guys, what are kind of your takes on differences and similarities at the high level, and then kind of as it trickles down to the lower level?
Okay, so I'll say differences and similarities at the high level. So at the high level, I would say differences as far as baseball to football. I believe that baseball players, obviously, the main thing is going to be the shoulder. You still have some sort of shoulder care that's wanted at the pro NFL level on football. However, the closest thing that I will have to like maybe like a pitcher's or a baseball player's shoulder would be a QB shoulder, and we can talk about that later. They would probably be more similar. However, you're going to spend more time kind of at that shoulder joint with a high level pitcher, and then for the NFL or just for a high level of pro guys, the demands on the NFL level outside of maybe like a infielder, a high level infielder, is going to be more lateral movement. And I have to prepare them for those quick, shifty, explosive actions, kind of side to side, versus maybe like a pitcher. There is some lateral force production there. Obviously, there's a lot of internal rotation as a hitter. But with a football player, I mean, you're change directions, especially if we train mostly DBs and D linemen. So like as a DB, you're doing a lot of things at once. You're asked to do a lot at once. You're asked to either change directions, move backwards, right? And then open up your hips, turn around and run. And at the same time, there's that contact aspect that comes with football, aside from baseball. Now, you may get some contact in baseball, slide into somebody. But in football, especially depending on the position you're in, there's a high level of contact. So I'm also prepping the body for a certain level of contact that's going to be demanded on them than a baseball player. And then as far as the, let's just say as far as the football players, right? What would you say an average play lasts?
Probably average, probably like 7 seconds.
So like
6,
7 seconds, and I'm depending on where you're at, I'm moving explosive for 7
That's
seconds.
probably a long play.
Right? That's a long play.
Yeah.
But even if I'm a D lineman come up the line, I'm exploding into something pretty aggressively. And there's obviously a lot of explosiveness with the MLB level. But if I'm playing like an outfielder, and I don't have no balls coming, I'm more reactive to what's out there if I'm an outfielder. So I may, sprint and explode through, but sometimes I might be just kind of just sitting there and trailing a little bit. So I think that would be the main difference. The training, I think there's a high level of conditioning we did with the NFL guys.
100%.
There is that. Not that we didn't do that with the MLB guys, but there should be no reason why you got a pro pitcher running through the same conditioning as like, I don't know, all pro DB.
It's just not
Like
required.
there's just not, it's not required, right? Maybe at a high school level, okay, sure, but there's a reason for it. Maybe I'm just trying to train this,
Yeah.
I'm trying to
Team.
teach this mental aspect and this team thing, but there's no reason why a pro level pitcher should be doing, 4 or 5 300-yard shuttles with, 15 seconds in between. Like you're not gonna, it's kind of like there's a certain point where it's kind of like you start doing more hurt than helping at that point. So I would say the condition is a big difference. At the lower level, so let's say a high school and college level, I would say that some of the sames. I would say the similarities would be depend on the position. So if I have like for a programming perspective, high school infielder would maybe have some of the same stuff as like, let's say I would have like a DB or a position player, especially if they're lateral a lot. But you know, there'd be just the same thing as the difference between a position player and a pitcher, right? The lower you go, kind of it converges a little bit, but the conditioning is still the biggest thing I would say is the difference. Similarities, obviously they're both, you know, explosive, powerful sports, and there's a high demand for that. We just talked about that, but yeah, I would say that would be.
Yeah, obviously the biggest thing is the contact aspect, and then the demands on the shoulder that come from throwing. However, the number one like injured joint in football is the shoulder, right? There's a study they did like a 20-year study on the NFL Combine, and 50% of the participants had some type of shoulder issue or missed games because of the shoulder. And of those 50%, 34% actually had surgery on the shoulder. So I think there's like in some of the NFL guys we've trained and football guys in general that we've trained, there is still some like neglect on like some smaller kind of shoulder conditioning to it, right? Because I view like shoulder strength as a conditioning strength. It's one thing to do rep for 5 reps with good form, another thing to do 10, 12, 15. And so I think why like the similarities are there's similar issues going on, but the differences are the why. Exactly.
Absolutely.
And the why you need, like a pitcher needs a strong, stable shoulder to throw 95 miles per hour. You need a strong, stable shoulder to keep it in place when you're taking on a block or diving for someone. So I think a lot of the similarities are kind of are within like the smaller details, if you will. This is just the difference of like why they need it, right? That, and then along the same lines as like lower body injuries. So like adductors and hammies is the number one soft tissue injury, non-contact in football and baseball, right? So baseball doesn't happen nearly as often as football. Football, you turn on the news every week, some soft tissues come up, especially in like training camp or OTAs, right? And so I think they still need that specific demand of, you know, some type of eccentric stress on the adductors or the hammies. Baseball in football, even though baseball you don't see it as much. That's just because, like Brandon said, there's not as much high level sprinting for a sustained amount of times and not as much cutting.
But in baseball, would it show up if you neglected that part of your training?
Yeah,
I had an experience, I think either at Baylor or Nacogdoches, where most of our team pulled their hamstring, like our baseball team, pulled their hamstrings at the beginning of the season, sort of just because, I guess going back to the original point, like, you know, the way that they were being taken care of strength-wise. And because of that, the next season they were not treated like so gingerly and were.
Yeah, it was addressed.
It was exactly.
Yeah,
I would say to that point, with the baseball, just in my experience, I think there was a year there where a lot of the college baseball players we were working with, they just started having a string of like hamstring issues, and I think that's when it was like we were kind of hidden that before in the programming, but it wasn't like it wasn't to the extent of the way we were doing it with the football. It was like, oh, at the end we'll hit some eccentric hamstring work, but it was like it wasn't to the point of like the football guys like, okay, we really got to get this in. There's a, you know, once again it's the why. So at that point in time, I mean, I had like a string of 4 or 5 phone calls like, hey coach, hamstring, boom, 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 and I was just like, what's going on? Yeah, boom, boom, boom action. And I was like, what's going on? But what was happening was it wasn't even in the, you know, in the season. It was like, okay, they're going back and they're doing a whole bunch of conditioning, you know, college stuff. I'm doing a whole bunch of running for a sustained period of time, and it was starting to pop up. And it's just like, to your point, it may not happen as frequently, but if that thing is neglected, it will pop up. So yeah, that's when I was, you know, at least in my program, and I was like, man, we're gonna be hitting that thing. It's of the utmost importance.
Yeah,
it's almost like the shoulder for football. Would that be
the
hamstring?
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to put it.
Great way to put it.
Yeah, that's actually pretty good, Greg. Yeah.
I'm new here, but we know the value's there.
Oh, sprinkle a little salt on that.
Come on, baby, salt,
a little seasoning.
But I think even if pitchers, you see pulled hamstrings in the land leg, right? And so if you're producing that much force throwing, you don't have the ability to kind of absorb that force and keep the knee like stabilized. So yeah, like soft tissue is vital in baseball, even though doesn't pop up as much as in football.
I didn't know that about the pitchers.
But as far as just like the training goes, like I think B kind of nailed it, where it's like the shoulders and the contacts, the biggest differences of like the stress of the actual sport, but then like the training, like, you know, even this summer mixing our college and high school football and baseball athletes together, like very similar field work stuff, like, right? Like, even though some of our football guys may be doing the lateral change of direction and cutting stuff because that's what their skill needs, our baseball guys still need it because there's a element of power development in doing that. And baseball is a lot of lateral power going on anytime you throw and anytime you hit, right? And if you can't throw or you can't hit very good, you're not going to play on the field regardless how fast you are, right? So lateral power development, even though football needs it in a different way than baseball needs it, right? So that's the difference, right? There's a difference in there, but there's also a similar need for that power and for that skill.
It's like you need it, how you use it, or how that attributes to your sport is going to be different, but you still need that.
Right, and the last thing I'll say on the difference is, and you can probably test this some too, like, unless you're a high level baseball players, high level football players, they're in their own category. You train them differently than you train anyone else, right? So let's just take that out of it, right? If you have a pitcher coming who's 15-5 last year at the 2.5, he's going to be taken care of a little bit differently. Or if you have a DB, a running back, quarterback, whoever comes in, they're a Pro Bowl guy, they're taken care of differently. They don't need to be like pushed necessarily like someone else, right? So I think also you find like baseball players like to be pushed like football players, like to be trained like that, right? Yeah, at least like this high school like, you know,
seems like it to me.
They want to be pushed, they want to be that, right? So it's like you can still have that mindset. And football players,
and I would argue sometimes they might even have to do it at a more consistent rate, just because like I feel like the high school kids that we mess, like they play all the time. They're either playing or off season or recovering, or it's like something. It's like you got to be mentally there, almost more than football, because at least we get a for sure off season.
Yeah,
I think too. To his point,
whole nother topic. That's a good
absolutely.
one.
To his point, I find myself a good, hardworking athlete, football, baseball. Like you said, they're gonna want to be pushed. I find it, and either one of y'all can agree or disagree, but in my experience, I find it with those players, whether it be football and baseball, I got to kind of pull them back sometimes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like, hey, man, look, you know, you don't have to go through the wall every single time. You know what I'm saying? Like, we got a purpose here. Like, with those, you know, the ones who are highly, and especially the ones we work with, and they are where they are for a reason, because they're highly motivated. And so it's like...
And competitive.
Right, and competitive. So sometimes you got to go by and be like, hey, bro, take this next rep off. Or, hey, let's ramp it down, versus having to go out there and really just, you know, push them through.
Yeah, I've seen that being a problem.
That's why deload weeks are so important.
Absolutely.